Have you ever gazed up at the night sky and felt a profound connection to something vast and incomprehensible, yet the thought of walking into a church or a mosque triggers an immediate internal resistance? Are you familiar with finding deep meaning in music, art, or nature, meaning that just doesn't fit within the confines of any sacred text? If so, you are certainly not alone. Millions worldwide today identify as spiritual but not religious. But what does this label really mean? Is it just a trendy phrase for the undecided, or is there something deeper at play, a conscious, profound, and entirely valid path to finding meaning in life? In this video, we're going on a fascinating journey to separate the wheat from the chaff. We won't just define this concept, we'll break down the entire framework. We'll expose the core myth preventing millions of people from finding harmony, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you will look at your inner world through completely different eyes. The main question we will answer is this: can you build a fulfilling, meaningful life based on spirituality while leaving organized religion completely aside? Let's find out. To understand why so many people today are decoupling spirituality from religion, we need to take a quick step back in history. For most of human history, these two concepts were inseparable. True Siamese twins, religion was the primary, and often the only, container for spiritual experience. It provided answers to every big question: where we came from, where we are going, how to live correctly, and what constitutes good and evil. The structure was rigid and clear: a god or gods, sacred texts, prophets, institutions like the church to interpret those texts, and rituals to connect the individual to the divine. This system worked for centuries, providing social cohesion, moral guidance, and comfort in the face of chaos and death. Starting with the Age of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, however, things began to shift. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant elevated human reason to the forefront. They encouraged the questioning of all authority, including the authority of the church. The idea that man could use his own mind to perceive truth slowly began to undermine religion's monopoly on spirituality. Later, in the 19th century, American transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau took this even further. They argued that the divine could be found, not in churches, but in nature and in the depths of one's own soul. Their ideas about self-reliance and personal spiritual experience became the forerunners of the modern, spiritual, but not religious movement. The 20th century, with its scientific breakthroughs, globalization, wars, and cultural revolutions, finally shook the old foundations completely. People gained access to information from around the world, discovering Eastern practices like Buddhism and yoga, while psychology began offering its own non-religious methods of self-discovery. Which brings us here to the 21st century, where individualism is valued higher than ever, and the phrase, "I am spiritual but not religious," has become not just a possible choice, but for many, the only honest description of their worldview. So let's start at the very foundation. To understand how spirituality differs from religion, we need to establish clear, working definitions for both. These words are often used interchangeably, but that's like confusing the recipe with the finished meal. Religion at its core is an organized system. Picture a large, sturdy house that has been built up over centuries. This house has a foundation. These are the dogmas, a set of tenets accepted purely on faith, without proof. For example, the doctrine of the Trinity in Christianity, or the Immaculate Conception. The house has walls. These are the sacred texts, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, containing the rules, narratives, and commandments. There is the roof, the institutional structure, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, with its hierarchy, popes, imams, and rabbis. This structure protects and disseminates the teachings. The windows and doors are the rituals and rites: baptism, salat, prayer, or Shabbat. They serve as entry points into the sacred space and ways of interacting with the divine. And finally, the inhabitants of this house, the community, the congregation of believers united by shared practices. In this way, religion offers a ready-made map, a detailed guidebook for life. It tells you what to believe, how to pray, how to behave, what to eat, and even whom to sleep with. It is a structured, collective path. It provides a sense of belonging, clarity, and community support. For millions around the world, this system provides incredible comfort and meaning. But, like any house, it comes with strict rules, and not everyone is willing or able to live by them. It is an external, prescribed path that one accepts as a given. Catholicism, for instance, with its rigid hierarchy, from the Pope down to the parish priest, and its mandatory sacraments and canon law, is a prime example of such a structured system, offering a ready-made set of answers for all of life's questions. Let's shift our focus now to spirituality. If religion is a house built for you, spirituality is more like a compass and a toolkit, allowing you to build your own shelter or simply navigate the world. Spirituality is a deeply personal, internal search. It's not a system, it's a process. At its core lies not dogma, but personal experience and deep inner knowing. This might manifest as a feeling of awe before the grandeur of nature, a sense of unity with all things during meditation, a profound insight sparked by a piece of music, or a sudden wave of compassion for another living being. Spirituality doesn't require belief in a specific personal deity, as found in the Abrahamic traditions. It can be rooted in faith in an impersonal force, energy, the universal consciousness, life itself, or simply the profound interconnectedness of everything. Unlike religion, which provides a ready-made map, spirituality is the act of drawing that map yourself. The central questions here aren't, what must I believe? But rather, what do I feel? What holds meaning for me? What are my core values? And how can I live in harmony with myself and the world? Instead of relying on external authority, a priest or a holy book, your own inner experience, intuition, and conscience become the primary guides. Instead of a preset collection of rituals, you are free to create your own. For example, for some, a morning cup of coffee, enjoyed in silence, with full presence in the moment, can become a more significant ritual than attending a Sunday service. Ultimately, spirituality is not about following rules, it's about asking questions. It is the path of the explorer, not the follower. This doesn't mean the path is easier. On the contrary, it demands greater responsibility, rigorous self-examination, and courage, because all the answers must be found within, not in ancient texts. It is an internal, individual, and often unique journey. Since we're on the subject of history, let's dig a little deeper into the philosophical roots of this split. The idea that personal experience might hold more weight than rigid dogma certainly didn't originate in the 21st century. Some of the earliest thinkers in Western culture to actively develop this idea were the Enlightenment philosophers. They weren't necessarily atheists. Many were deists, believing in a creator God who set the universe in motion like a clockwork mechanism and then stepped back, choosing not to intervene in its affairs. For them, reason was the primary tool for understanding, including understanding the divine. They argued that universal moral laws could be derived through logic and observation of nature, rather than solely through the revelations recorded in the Bible. They heavily criticized blind faith, religious wars, and the Church's absolute authority over people's minds. This was the first powerful push toward the idea of having a connection with a higher power outside of official institutions. But the true flowering of individual spirituality occurred in 19th century America with the rise of transcendentalism. Thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller became the true prophets of spirituality without organized religion. In his essay, Self-Reliance, Emerson urged every person to trust their intuition and unique view of the world, rather than blindly conforming to tradition. He famously wrote that an inherent divinity resides within every individual. Thoreau took this notion further. Living simply in a cabin, by Walden Pond for 2 years, seeking truth through solitude and direct communion with nature. His book, Walden, or Life in the Woods, became the definitive guide for those seeking spirituality in simplicity and natural living, rejecting ornate church rituals. The transcendentalists believed that the divine was present everywhere, in every tree, in every person, and therefore no mediators were necessary for communication. Their ideas, bold and revolutionary for their era, laid a powerful foundation for the modern understanding of spirituality as a deeply personal and intimate journey. All right, we've covered the history and the philosophy. But why is it that so many people are choosing this particular path right now? Let's dive into the psychology of this trend. What compels the modern individual to say, thanks but no thanks, to organise religion, and instead venture out into the open waters of independent spirituality? There are several reasons, and they run deep. The first, and arguably one of the most common reasons, is negative personal experience. For a vast number of people, religion is associated with trauma. This might stem from a strict upbringing rooted in guilt and fear, encountering hypocrisy, or even experiencing abuse at the hands of religious figures. When a system that is supposed to offer love and light instead delivers pain and disappointment, people naturally turn away. Yet, the intrinsic need for meaning and connection to something greater doesn't vanish. So they start searching elsewhere, on their own terms, free from the risk of getting burned again. The second major factor is intellectual disagreement with dogma. The modern individual, raised in an era of science and critical thinking, often struggles to accept assertions that contradict scientific evidence or basic logic. Stories about talking snakes, a global flood, or a virgin birth may seem like nothing more than ancient myths. While they might respect these narratives as cultural heritage, they simply cannot use them as the foundation for their worldview. Furthermore, many doctrines feel morally outdated. For example, the stance of certain religions on women, the LGBTQ2+ community, or people of different faiths. The third reason is the deep desire for personal freedom and authenticity. In a culture that places such high value on individuality, the idea of adhering to a standardized one-size-fits-all rulebook often feels suffocating. People want to decide for themselves what to believe and how to live. They seek to create a value system that reflects their own unique experience, rather than accepting a prefabricated one developed thousands of years ago in a completely different cultural context. This isn't rebellion merely for the sake of rebellion. It's a profound yearning to live in alignment with the self. It is the rejection of external authority in favour of the internal, the authority of one's conscience, one's heart, and one's mind. But what about science? Many people think science and spirituality are mortal enemies. Like oil and water, they see science as strictly about facts, matter, and objectivity, and spirituality as merely feelings, faith, and subjectivity. But is that really the case? Over the last few decades, an incredible convergence has emerged between these two worlds. This actively debunks a major myth, that to be spiritual is to be anti-scientific. Let's start with neuroscience. Using technologies like functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, scientists can now literally peer inside the brain of someone meditating or experiencing a mystical state. And what are they finding? Research, notably by neuroscientist Richard Davidson, has shown that long-term mindfulness meditation leads to real, measurable changes in the structure and function of the brain itself. Meditators show increased density of grey matter in regions associated with attention, self-awareness, and compassion, like the prefrontal cortex and the insula. Simultaneously, activity decreases in the amygdala, our brain's fear and anxiety centre. This isn't just someone feeling calmer. These are objective, physiological changes. Another fascinating area is the research into psychedelics, conducted at serious institutions like Johns Hopkins University. Under strict medical control, participants are given psilocybin, the active compound found in magic mushrooms. The vast majority of subjects report experiencing profound mystical states, a feeling of unity with everything, ego dissolution, and a deep sense of the sacred. This experience often triggers lasting positive shifts in personality. People become more open, kinder, and less fearful of death. And once again, scientists can observe the brain activity. Psychedelics temporarily dampen the default mode network, which is largely responsible for our sense of self and ego, and allow different brain regions to communicate more freely with one another. So, science isn't refuting spirituality, quite the opposite. It is beginning to find a tangible physiological substrate for it. It demonstrates that spiritual experiences are not fabrications, but measurable real states of consciousness that can be studied and which have a profound impact on our overall well-being. Let's tackle one of the most common myths and criticisms leveled against people who pursue a spiritual path outside the framework of organized religion. The argument usually goes something like this: your spirituality is just plain selfishness. It's a convenient religion for yourself, where you are your own God, you do whatever you want, and you aren't accountable to anyone. It's simply self-indulgence, masquerading as enlightenment. This criticism often comes from adherents of traditional faiths, and at first glance, it can sound quite compelling. After all, if there's no external God judging you and no defined community holding you responsible, doesn't the whole thing just devolve into spiritual narcissism? Let's take a closer look. The criticism misses one key point. True, deep spirituality isn't about feeling good 24/7. It's not a soul spa. On the contrary, it is often a difficult and uncomfortable journey of self-discovery. It requires the courage to look into your own dark corners, acknowledge your weaknesses, and process your traumas. This demands far greater personal accountability than simply following a set of external rules, because there is no one else you can blame or from whom you can seek easy forgiveness. Furthermore, the core of most genuine spiritual paths, much like many religions, is the idea of transcendence, moving beyond the limits of the small self. The crucial outcome of spiritual growth is not the amplification of the ego, but its weakening, or even its dissolution. When a person, through meditation, connection with nature, or compassionate action, begins to feel their deep connection with other people, with animals, and with the planet, their egoistic desires fade into the background. They start to realize that harm caused to another is harm caused to themselves, because we are all parts of one interconnected whole. Instead of egocentrism, what emerges is ecocentrism or human-centrism. The goal shifts from personal salvation in the afterlife to serving life right here, right now. Many spiritual but non-religious individuals are active volunteers, environmentalists, and social justice advocates. Their moral compass, which is grounded in empathy and a sense of interconnectedness, often proves to be just as reliable as one based on the fear of divine punishment. So, the myth that spirituality is simply narcissism is a profound misconception that confuses the individual path with an egocentric goal. Alright, we spend a lot of time discussing the theory, but how does this actually play out in practice? What are the practical tools people use on this journey? Let's dive into one of the most fundamental and popular practices, mindfulness. While many have heard the term, it is often widely misunderstood. Mindfulness is not just simple relaxation. It's not about trying to empty your mind, and it's certainly not some kind of esoteric magic. It is a highly specific skill that can, and absolutely should, be trained, much like a muscle in the gym. Essentially, mindfulness is the ability to intentionally direct your attention to the present moment, without judgment. It sounds simple, but give it a try. Sit down right now, and for just 1 minute, simply observe your breathing. You will be astonished how quickly your mind drifts away, to the past, the future, to your to-do lists, anxieties, and fantasies. Our mind is a thought-producing machine, and most of the time, we are completely identified with that stream. We aren't driving the car. The flow is driving us. The practice of mindfulness is how we regain that control. Classical mindfulness meditation involves sitting in a comfortable posture and directing your focus toward a specific anchor, most often the sensation of your breath. When your mind wanders, and it will wander thousands of times, your job is not to criticize yourself, but gently and kindly acknowledge the distraction and return your focus back to the breath. Every single return is one rep for your attention muscle. So, what are the benefits? First, you begin to observe your thoughts and emotions from the outside instead of being enslaved by them. You realize you are not your anxiety and you are not your anger. You are the awareness, the space in which they arise and dissolve. This realization grants immense freedom. Second, you start truly living your life. Instead of drinking tea while thinking about work, you are simply drinking the tea, savoring its taste, warmth, and aroma. Life transforms from black and white to full color. While this practice originated in the East through Buddhism, today it is taught in a completely secular context, in corporations, schools, hospitals, and even the military. Its effectiveness in reducing stress, anxiety, and symptoms of depression has been proven by hundreds of scientific studies. It is the perfect example of a profound spiritual practice that is truly accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs. Let's move on to the next item in our toolkit of practical approaches. The second crucial practice for many spiritual seekers is cultivating a profound connection with nature. This, of course, is hardly a new idea. Since ancient times, humanity has sensed the presence of something sacred in the natural world. Shamans, druids, Taoists, and the transcendentalists we mentioned earlier, they all drew wisdom and strength from communing with the forests, mountains, and rivers. In our modern world, where most of us dwell in concrete jungles completely divorced from natural rhythms, this need for connection has become acutely urgent. Why does nature possess this spiritual power? Firstly, it yanks us out of our ego-driven bubble. When you stand on a mountain peak, looking at the valley stretching out below, or when you gaze up at the vastness of the Milky Way, your personal problems, your work anxieties, or small arguments with loved ones suddenly appear infinitesimally trivial. Nature provides us with crucial perspective. It reminds us that we are part of something much greater and more ancient than our own brief lives. This experience of awe or wonder, which psychologists have researched extensively, actually makes us more generous, kinder, and less self-centered. Secondly, nature serves as a profound teacher of cycles and acceptance. It teaches us that spring always follows winter, and that death and birth are merely two sides of the same coin. By watching an old tree decay and become nourishment for new life, we can learn to accept the inevitable changes and losses we face ourselves. How do we put this into practice? This doesn't require you to pack up and spend a month in the wilderness. You can start small. Find your nearest local park and walk there simply, leaving your phone and headphones behind. Consciously feel the earth beneath your feet, touch the bark of a tree, and listen to the birdsong. You might start caring for houseplants indoors. You can also consciously track the turning of the seasons, acknowledging the days of the solstices and equinoxes. For countless individuals, these simple actions become a form of meditation, a powerful way to ground themselves and truly feel their belonging in this world. This approach, sometimes termed eco-spirituality, is rapidly gaining momentum because it not only nourishes the soul, but also inspires us to care for our planet, which ultimately is our only home. The third and perhaps most potent path to a spiritual experience, one that requires no commitment to dogma, is the realm of art and creativity. Have you ever stopped to wonder why music can move you to tears? Why a painting can utterly captivate you? Or why a poem can make your heart race? This happens because art is the language of the soul. It speaks to us on a level far deeper than logic or mere words. Art has the power to trigger what psychologist Abraham Maslow called peak experiences, moments of pure ecstasy, profound insight, and a sense of oneness with the world. These experiences are inherently spiritual. Crucially, this path works both ways, for the person who perceives the art and for the person who creates it. When you completely surrender yourself to the sound of a Bach symphony or the swirling chaos of Van Gogh's Starry Night, your ego temporarily recedes. You stop worrying about yourself and your troubles. You simply are, merged with the piece of art. This is a moment of pure presence and connection to something much larger than yourself, whether it's the artist's genius, universal human emotion, or beauty itself. This experience can be just as profoundly spiritual as praying inside a sacred space. Conversely, the act of creation itself can be a powerful spiritual practice. When a painter, musician, writer, or even a potter is fully engrossed in their work, they enter a state that psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow. In this state, the sense of time dissolves, self-consciousness vanishes, and there is only action and complete unity with that action. Many creative individuals describe this feeling as though some higher power is creating through them, as if they are merely conduits. This doesn't have to be high art. You can experience this flow when you lovingly prepare a meal, tend to a garden, knit, or dance. Any action performed with total attention and dedication can become a creative act and a form of meditation. Thus, art and creativity offer us infinite possibilities for exploring our inner world, for expressing what cannot be put into words, and for touching the transcendent, that which lies just beyond ordinary reality. It is yet another way to build your personal temple, whose walls are canvases, and whose sacred music is the sound of a guitar or the rhythmic turning of a potter's wheel. Both religion and spirituality wrestle with one of life's most central questions. What is the meaning and purpose of our existence? Organised religions typically provide ready-made answers. For instance, in Christianity, the goal is to serve God, follow His commandments, and achieve salvation in heaven. In Islam, it means complete submission to the will of Allah. These are clear and powerful guides that give life a definite direction. But what happens to someone who cannot accept these answers? Are they doomed to a meaningless existence in an absurd world? Absolutely not. The spiritual, non-religious approach suggests that we shouldn't seek meaning externally, in divine commandments, but internally, within life itself. This is where the ideas of existential philosophy and psychology come into play. Thinkers like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre argued that the universe inherently lacks meaning. Meaning is absent, it must be created. We are thrown into this world, and our freedom, coupled with our responsibility, is to infuse our lives with meaning through our choices and actions. While this might seem terrifying, it is in fact an incredibly liberating idea. It tells us that we are not pawns in someone else's game, but the artists painting the canvas of our own lives. The Austrian psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of Nazi concentration camps, developed this concept further in his teaching, logotherapy, or meaning-centered therapy. By observing the prisoners, he concluded that those who survived were often the ones who had a why to live for, perhaps seeing their children again, or finishing a book. Frankl identified 3 primary ways we can find meaning. The first is through creation and work, by contributing something new to the world. The second is through experience, through loving another person, or by appreciating the beauty of nature and art. And the third, and perhaps the most profound, is through the attitude we adopt toward unavoidable suffering. Even when we cannot change a situation, we retain the freedom to choose how we respond to it. Thus, for the spiritual person, the meaning of life isn't a treasure hunt, something to be discovered, but a structure that must be built. Meaning can be found in raising children, helping others, exploring the world, creating beauty, or simply striving to become the best version of ourselves. It is a dynamic, living process, not a static truth given once and for all. The next logical and crucial question we need to address is, what is the basis of morality? If there's no God handing down commandments on stone tablets and no fear of hellfire, doesn't that open the door to the idea that everything is permitted? Where does a spiritual but non-religious person derive their sense of right and wrong? This leads us to another widespread myth, that morality is simply impossible without religion, yet history and contemporary ethical thought prove this belief false. The foundation of secular or humanistic ethics is not divine revelation, but rather intrinsic human qualities, reason, empathy, and the desire for well-being. Let's break down how this works. First, empathy. This is our innate ability to sympathize and feel another person's pain as if it were our own. Neuroscience has even discovered so-called mirror neurons in our brain, which activate both when we perform an action ourselves and when we witness someone else doing it. Empathy is the biological foundation of morality. We don't need a commandment saying, "Thou shalt not kill," to understand that causing pain to another living creature is wrong. We feel it inherently. Second, reason and logic. Building upon empathy, we can construct an entire ethical system. The most famous principle is the Golden Rule, which states, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." What's fascinating is that this rule exists in some form in nearly all cultures and religions, demonstrating its profound universality. But applying it requires no belief in God. Just a simple thought experiment. Do I want someone to steal from me? No. Then I shouldn't steal from them. Do I want to be lied to? Absolutely not. Then I must be honest. Third, the pursuit of collective well-being. Secular ethics is often consequentialist, meaning we judge an action based on its outcomes or consequences. A good action is defined as one that maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering for the greatest number of people. This idea, known as utilitarianism, demands that we consider not just ourselves, but how our actions impact society as a whole. Thus, the morality of a spiritual person is founded not on the fear of punishment or the desire for an afterlife reward, but on a deep internal conviction that compassion, honesty, and care for others are simply the best way to coexist on this planet. It is a morality that comes from within, not one imposed from without. Another common criticism levelled against the spiritual but not religious is that they are simply loners. As we've discussed, organised religion offers a powerful sense of community, a feeling of belonging to a large family. Congregants pray together, celebrate together, and support each other through hard times. But what about the individualistic spiritual seeker? Are they doomed to isolation in their quest? This stereotype of the lone mystic sitting on a mountaintop simply doesn't hold up. Yes, the spiritual path is fundamentally an inner journey, and moments of solitude are essential. But that doesn't mean it must be traversed in complete isolation. Humans are social creatures, and the need for connection and support from like-minded people never truly goes away. The forms of connection are simply different. The modern world offers countless ways for people to find their tribe outside the boundaries of traditional faith. This might include meditation groups where people gather to practice and share their insights. It could be retreat centres where you can deepen your practice in a supportive environment for days or weeks. Or even yoga classes, which for many are less about fitness and more about connecting with those who share similar values. Online communities play a massive role. Forums, social media groups, podcasts, and YouTube channels dedicated to spirituality, self-improvement, and philosophy gather millions worldwide. Here you can ask questions, share realizations, find support, and truly grasp that you are not alone in your journey. Furthermore, the spiritual person's community doesn't have to be formal. Their congregation might be close friends with whom they can discuss profound topics, their family built on love and respect, or even a circle of colleagues working toward a shared, meaningful purpose. It is crucial to understand that the quality of the connection matters more than quantity or formal affiliation. You can feel incredibly lonely in a crowded church if you don't share the beliefs of those around you, but conversely, feel a deep bond with a single friend with whom you share genuine spiritual kinship. So, the myth of the spiritual person as an isolated outcast is just that, a myth. Finding like-minded individuals is a natural and essential part of this path. The subject of rituals is intimately connected with the concept of community. Religions are saturated with rituals, weekly services, annual holidays, ceremonies marking key life moments, birth, marriage, death, Rituals are not simply meaningless actions. They carry deep psychological significance. They structure our time, create a sense of stability, help us navigate difficult periods, and connect us both to the past and to our community. When someone steps away from religion, they often feel a void, a deep lack of these meaningful, repeated actions. Does this mean the spiritual path is a life without ritual? Absolutely not. It simply means that, as with everything else in this journey, the focus shifts from collective, prescribed rituals to personal, self-created ones. A spiritual person can, and should, establish their own rituals that hold meaning specifically for them. What might these be? Anything at all. For some, it might be a morning ritual, 5 minutes of silence before starting the day, drinking a cup of tea with complete focus, or making an entry in a gratitude journal. This type of ritual helps ground you and set the tone for the day. For others, it could be an evening routine, a short meditation before bed to release the day's stress, or reading a few pages of an inspiring book. Personal rituals can also connect us with nature. For instance, celebrating the solstices and equinoxes, the most ancient natural holidays. This might simply involve taking a walk in the woods on that day, contemplating the cyclical nature of life, and reflecting on the balance of light and darkness both within and outside ourselves. We can create rituals for processing grief, for example, lighting a candle in memory of a lost loved one on their birthday. We can also establish rituals for celebrating our achievements, even the smallest ones. The key difference between a personal ritual and a religious one is that its meaning isn't imposed externally. It is invested by the person themselves. Its power doesn't come from, "This is what the ancestors did," or "This is what the book says," but from the fact that it resonates with your inner world here and now. Creating these small, sacred moments in daily life is a powerful way to infuse it with meaning, depth, and mindfulness. It is a way of telling the universe, "I am here. I am present. My life matters." We can't honestly paint only a rosy picture here. Like any worldview, the spiritual but not religious, or SBNR, concept faces criticism and has genuine weaknesses. It's crucial to examine these openly if we want to maintain a balanced perspective. The criticism usually comes from two opposing flanks: traditional religious adherents on one side and staunch atheists and skeptics on the other. Let's dive into their arguments. Religious critics often claim this kind of self-made spirituality is merely a superficial, spiritual supermarket or a smorgasbord of beliefs. They argue that individuals cherry-pick what appeals to them from various traditions. A little Buddhism here, a dash of Sufism, a hint of shamanism there, while conveniently ignoring the complicated or inconvenient aspects of those teachings. The result, in their view, is a shallow, eclectic system designed primarily to indulge the ego. There is a kernel of truth to this criticism. The risk of taking a superficial approach is very real, where someone simply collects beautiful quotes and exotic practices without truly delving into anything meaningful. Without the structure and discipline provided by a defined tradition, it is easy to lose one's way. Now let's look at the critique from the atheist camp. Their stance is often, "Your spirituality is just religion without the rules. You still believe in some vague energy, the universe, or a higher power. You haven't rejected God. You've just replaced him with a fuzzier, more convenient substitute. You can't prove any of this exists, so it's the same irrational faith, just in new packaging." This argument also deserves attention. It is true that many spiritual individuals believe in something transcendent, something that lies outside the scope of scientific knowledge. To a strict materialist, this may indeed seem indistinguishable from belief in God. However, the key difference lies in the approach. Spirituality generally doesn't insist on the objective truth of its beliefs for everyone. It's often framed as a personal, subjective experience that doesn't claim the status of universal law. A spiritual person might counter, "I don't know if a cosmic consciousness exists, but living according to this idea makes me a better and happier person." This is a far more flexible and less dogmatic position. Ultimately, both lines of criticism point toward very real dangers: the risk of superficiality and the risk of self-deception. Recognizing these risks is the crucial first step toward avoiding them. Let's clarify another crucial distinction, one that often causes confusion. What exactly is the difference between the position spiritual but not religious and being an agnostic? These concepts are often conflated, but they actually address completely different aspects of reality. Agnosticism fundamentally is an epistemological position, a stance concerning knowledge itself. The agnostic answers the question, does God or a higher power exist? With their famous conclusion, I don't know, and frankly, no one can know. An agnostic asserts that the human intellect is, in principle, incapable of proving or disproving the existence of the transcendent. Consequently, they suspend judgment. It is a position rooted in intellectual honesty and humility. Agnosticism, then, is about the limits of human knowledge. Spirituality, on the other hand, is primarily about experience, what we can feel and undergo personally. The spiritual person is less concerned with the question, what is real, and more focused on, how should I live? Their interest lies not in the metaphysical structure of the universe, but in the practical pursuit of meaning, harmony, and connection. Can these two positions coexist in a single person? Absolutely. In fact, this is an incredibly common dynamic. Someone might be an agnostic on the intellectual plane, acknowledging that they lack and perhaps cannot acquire definitive proof of God. Yet, on the existential plane, they can be profoundly spiritual. This person might meditate, not because they believe it will connect them to some transcendent force like Brahman, but because they have personally experienced that it makes them calmer and more compassionate. They might feel reverence for nature, not out of belief in the goddess Gaia, but simply because that experience is inherently valuable and enriches their life. Essentially, this individual is saying, I don't know what lies beyond the visible world, but I do know that certain practices and perspectives make my life here and now more meaningful, profound, and joyful. This combined position allows them to avoid the dogmatism of both hard religion and rigid atheism. They never claim to know the ultimate truth, but they also refuse to give up the search and the value of personal experience. They remain an open, curious explorer of reality, both the external world and the landscape within. Eastern practices have played a monumental role in shaping modern Western spirituality. Yoga, meditation, Qigong, and Tai Chi, these terms are now household names. Millions of people worldwide roll out their yoga mats, sit in the lotus position, or perform graceful flowing movements in local parks. However, it is crucial to understand that upon arriving in the West, these practices underwent a significant transformation. In their native cultures, India, China, and Tibet, they were, and remain, integral components of complex religious and philosophical systems, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Yoga, for example, is far more than just a set of physical exercises. It is one of the 6 schools of Hindu philosophy, an 8-limbed path designed to achieve liberation, or samadhi. The asanas, or physical postures, are merely one of those 8 limbs. Similarly, Buddhist meditation is not simply a relaxation technique. It is a central tool for understanding the nature of reality and achieving enlightenment, or nirvana. When these practices arrived in the West, particularly during the 20th century, they were largely decoupled from their original religious and cultural context. They were adapted for a Western audience, often unwilling to embrace the complex, accompanying mythology and metaphysics. The focus shifted dramatically from the ultimate goals like liberation or enlightenment to more immediate, tangible and pragmatic benefits: stress reduction, improved health, increased concentration, and emotional balance. This is how, for instance, the secular mindfulness-based stress reduction program, known as MBSR, was born. Developed by John Kabat-Zinn, it utilizes Buddhist meditation techniques in a completely scientific and non-religious framework. This process of adaptation carries both advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand, it has made these powerful tools accessible to an enormous number of people who would never have encountered them in their traditional forms. This has undoubtedly benefited millions. On the other hand, there is the distinct risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, losing the essential depth and wisdom contained within these traditions. When yoga becomes purely fitness and meditation merely a tool for maximizing productivity, their true transformative potential is lost. Therefore, for the dedicated spiritual seeker, finding a balance is essential. Use these practices in daily life, but always treat their roots with respect, and, whenever possible, delve into the profound philosophy that underpins them. The question of death is arguably the most complex and inescapable challenge that any worldview must confront. Religions offer clear, often comforting answers: eternal life in paradise, reincarnation, or merger with the divine. These beliefs help people cope with the existential dread of non-existence. But what does a spiritual yet non-religious approach offer? How can it help us face our own finality without the promise of an immortal soul? While there is no single definitive answer, there are several lines of thought that can provide solace and acceptance. The first is shifting our focus from the duration of life to its depth and quality. If this life truly is all we have, every single moment becomes infinitely valuable. Recognizing our mortality motivates us to stop postponing life, urging us to live fully, brightly, and meaningfully in the here and now. This is a call to stop wasting time on the trivial, and instead dedicate ourselves to what truly matters: to love, to create, to learn, and to help others. The second idea is continuity, not in an individual soul, but in something greater. This continuation can be found in our children and grandchildren, in the work we accomplish, the ideas we sow, and the lasting fond memory we leave in the hearts of others. This is the concept of legacy. We pass away, but the best parts of us continue to live on in the world. A third, more mystical perspective is the idea of unity with nature and the cosmos. From this viewpoint, our bodies are composed of atoms that were once part of distant stars. After death, these atoms do not vanish. They simply return to the great cycle of matter, becoming part of the soil, the plants, and other living things. Our individual consciousness may fade, but the essential life force that animated us merely changes form. This is not the immortality of the ego, but a dissolution into eternity, a profound return home. Such perspectives, admittedly, require courage and acceptance. They do not offer easy comfort, but they can lead to a deep sense of peace and harmony with the natural order of things, where life and death are not enemies, but inseparable partners in the great dance of existence. When discussing spirituality, we must inevitably touch upon a deeply sensitive and often controversial topic: psychedelics. For millennia, various cultures across the globe have utilized what are known as entheogens, substances said to awaken the divine within. This includes psilocybin mushrooms used by the Aztecs, the ayahuasca brew consumed by Amazonian tribes, and soma in ancient India. Shamans and priests incorporated them into rituals for communicating with spirits, healing, and receiving prophecies. In the 20th century, with the discovery of LSD, psychedelics entered Western culture and for a time became a symbol of the counterculture. This was followed by a long period of prohibition and often outright demonization. However, over the last 2 decades, we have witnessed a true renaissance of scientific research into psychedelics at leading global institutions, including Imperial College London, NYU, and Yale University. The results of these studies are nothing short of astonishing. Researchers have found that a single, controlled dose of psilocybin or LSD administered in a supportive setting can reliably induce a profound mystical experience. By all accounts, this experience is virtually indistinguishable from the states described for centuries by mystics across all religious traditions: a feeling of oneness with everything, ego dissolution, boundless love and awe, and the realization of deep truths about the self and the universe. Furthermore, this experience often leads to lasting positive changes. Terminally ill cancer patients overcome the fear of death, and individuals struggling with severe depression and addiction are finding the strength for true healing. It is crucial to understand one thing: psychedelics are neither a magic bullet nor recreational entertainment. They are an immensely powerful tool, and in the wrong hands or when misused, they can be dangerous. They don't create spirituality. Rather, they act as a catalyst, a key that temporarily opens the door to the deepest layers of the psyche. They can show an individual their potential and provide the experience of unity that many spiritual paths strive for. But once that door closes, the real work begins, the integration of that experience into daily life. For many on a spiritual journey, such an experience can become a genuine turning point, confirming that beyond our ordinary, ego-driven consciousness exist alternative, far deeper, and more meaningful states of being. We now turn our attention to one of the greatest hazards facing the modern spiritual seeker, the so-called spiritual marketplace. Where there is demand, supply always follows, and because the interest in spirituality without religion is massive, an entire industry has sprung up offering quick and easy fixes for every spiritual problem imaginable. This marketplace is riddled with pitfalls, and it is essential to learn how to recognize them so you do not fall prey to deception, or, perhaps worse, self-deception. The first major pitfall involves the pseudo-gurus and dubious teachers. These are charismatic figures who declare themselves enlightened, demand unquestioning loyalty, promise instant healing, and naturally charge a hefty price for it. They often employ manipulation, prey on feelings of guilt, and aggressively cultivate a personality cult around themselves. A genuine spiritual teacher will never suppress your will. Instead, they will help you uncover your own inner wisdom. They will point at the moon, not demand that you worship their finger. The second risk is overt commercialization. Many profound ancient practices are being repackaged and sold as fashionable commodities. Yoga is reduced to expensive leggings, meditation becomes a premium phone app, and mindfulness is co-opted into corporate productivity training. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with these tools themselves, but the danger is that the beautiful packaging completely obscures the core essence. Spirituality is not something you buy. It is something you must actively practice. The third pitfall is toxic positivity. This is the pervasive idea that you must always be positive, always vibrating at high frequencies, and that any negative emotion is proof of your lack of spirituality. This approach forces people to suppress and deny their authentic feelings, anger, grief, and fear. But genuine spirituality is not about being perpetually happy. It is about being whole. It is about having the courage to face your own shadow, processing and accepting all your emotions rather than pretending they simply do not exist. So how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? The primary criterion is your internal compass. Develop critical thinking, ask questions, test everything against your own direct experience. If something seems too good to be true, it almost certainly is. And remember this: the authentic spiritual path leads to greater freedom, responsibility, and compassion, not to dependency on a teacher or the latest trendy methodology. So, we've come a long way. We've defined religion and spirituality, delved into history and psychology, examined specific practices, responded to critics, and talked about the common pitfalls. And now we arrive at the central question: how do we bring all these pieces together? How can you practically forge your own personal spiritual system, a unique path that truly works for you? It's not as daunting as it sounds. In fact, it's a creative and fascinating process. Here are a few practical steps that can guide you. Step 1. Self-exploration. Before you build anything, you need to examine the raw material. That material is you. Ask yourself some honest questions. What is truly important to me in life? What are my core values? When do I feel most alive, most connected to something larger? What brings me joy and what causes me suffering? What do good and evil mean to me? Grab a journal and just start writing down your thoughts without filtering them. This is your initial data. Step 2. Research and experimentation. Start studying different traditions, not as rigid dogma, but as sources of inspiration. Read about Buddhism, Taoism, Stoicism, humanism. Then try out different practices. Commit to mindfulness meditation for a month. Try keeping a gratitude journal. Try taking regular walks in the park without your phone. Try volunteering. Approach this like a scientist running an experiment. Note what resonates with your soul and what doesn't. What makes you calmer, kinder, more aware? Don't be afraid to borrow small pieces from different sources. Your goal isn't to copy someone else's path, but to create your own. Step 3. Establish personal rituals. As we've discussed, rituals are vital. Based on your experiences, create a few simple yet meaningful practices that you commit to doing regularly. They can be incredibly simple, but these small anchors are what will sustain you on your journey. Debunking. Step 4. Find community. Find at least 1 or 2 people with whom you can discuss these topics openly and without judgment. Share your discoveries, your doubts, and your struggles. Support from like-minded people is priceless. Step 5. Stay flexible. And finally, the 5th and most critical step, stay flexible. Your spiritual system isn't a monolith carved in stone. It is a living organism that will grow and change right along with you. What worked for you in your 20s might not work in your 40s. Be ready to re-examine your beliefs. Let go of the old and try the new. The main purpose of this path is not to reach some final destination, but the process itself, the process of knowing yourself and the world, the process of becoming a more whole, loving, and wise human being. Okay, let's take a moment to wrap up this extensive journey we've been on. The core question remains, can you truly be spiritual without being religious? Based on everything we've covered, I believe the answer is a resounding yes. We've established that religion is an organised collective system, complete with specific dogmas, rituals, and institutions. Spirituality, on the other hand, is a deeply personal, internal quest for meaning, connection, and values, driven purely by individual experience. These two concepts aren't mutually exclusive. You can certainly be both religious and spiritual at the same time. But it is also entirely possible to walk a profound spiritual path without belonging to any organised religion whatsoever. We discovered that this path is certainly not a 21st century invention. Its roots are deeply embedded in history and philosophy. Furthermore, we found that this approach doesn't contradict science. In many ways, it finds confirmation within it. We broke down concrete practices, things like mindfulness, connecting with nature, and creativity, all of which are accessible to everyone. We saw that you can build a strong ethical foundation, find community, and even create your own powerful rituals entirely outside of traditional church walls. Most importantly, we debunked the myth that this path is reserved for egoists or loners. True spirituality doesn't lead to self-absorption. It fosters a deep, profound sense of compassion and unity with all living things. This journey certainly demands greater responsibility, courage, and self-reflection. It has its share of stumbling blocks, and there are no easy, pre-packaged answers, but that, ultimately, is where its true beauty and value lie. It is the path for those ready to take ownership of their life and their ultimate meaning. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me and sticking with the video until the very end. If you found this discussion helpful or thought-provoking, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel tremendously. And, of course, subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives. Now, I have one final question for you. How do you define your own spirituality? Do you consider yourself religious, spiritual, both, or neither? Share your story in the comments below. I am genuinely eager to read your thoughts and experiences. Let's start a truly meaningful discussion. I'll see you in the next video.